Don't place the lock of silence on my lips, for I must tell my entire secret to all the people of the world. I must make known the fiery cadences of my song. My dear sister, I am talking to you from Iran. I am reaching out to convey the silent voice of the women in Iran to my sisters who are struggling in Italy, Spain, Germany, India, Turkey, Kurdistan, Iraq, Argentina, Venezuela, Chile, and all over the world.
We're living in a deeply patriarchal society and have been held hostage by an Islamo-fascist regime for over 4 decades, who declared war on women upon its establishment in February 1979. It immediately changed civil and family laws in favor of men, imposed the veil on our bodies, and after our egalitarian revolution, handed over our right to self-determination to the male-dominated institutions.
Imagine that by law, as a woman in this country, I do not have the right to work, travel, or even have the custody of my children without the permission of my husband or my father.
منتها راجع به فرزند شما نمیتونی بگی من فرزند بهش حق اون هم فرزند. اگر شما بچه رو نگه داری بهش ندی او شکایت بکنه در این رابطه یا زندان محکوم میشی یا 300,000 تومان جریمه داره 6 ماه زندان. میل خودت بفرمایید.
This legal and political situation is intertwined with the existing structural patriarchy to increase and intensify gender oppression against women and the subordinated genders in all areas.
In terms of production and economy during the past years, we have witnessed a severe recession caused by the crisis that the dominating economic system repeatedly generates. Embezzlement, fraud, corruption, and mismanagement of the state by the Iranian regime, together with sanctions and profiteering, warmongering policies promoted by the Iranian regime, the Western states, and the regional powers, have exposed the working class, especially women, to widespread exploitation and poverty.
All this happens while Western human rights organizations and institutions are appeasing a criminal and fascist dictatorship over the security and lives of human beings in the Middle East.
Unemployment, high prices, rampant inflation combined with lack of welfare and social protection schemes, as well as the suppression of trade unions and the systematic application of gender and racial discrimination, have led us to submit the precarious work for law and unequal wages and to intimidation and sexual harassment at work.
Privatizations and the transfer of public companies to private shareholders and the ruling class have granted them the opportunity to make decisions on our fate based on their interests without any accountability, thus delaying the payment of our wages, laying off workers, shutting down production units, and endangering the livelihoods of millions and millions of workers. Meanwhile, within the working class, the migrant and women remain the most vulnerable.
ما تا الان خواستمون طلب حقوقمون بوده.
بله همین
5 ماه حقوق نگرفتیم.
درسته.
مایی که رسمی بودیم، اونایی که قراردادی بودن که خیلی بیشتر، اونایی که روزمزد بودن خیلی بیشتر، اونایی که پیمانی بودن خیلی بیشتر. از حالا به بعد حقوق نمیخوایم. از حالا به بعد حرف ما رفتن افشار.
اسدبگی اسماعیل اسدبگی
واگذاری شرکت از بخش خصوصی به بخش دولتی. تا زمانی کسی پاسخگوی کارگرای هفت‌تپه و خانواده هاشون نباشه، کار توی این شرکت تعلیقه. از فردا اعتصاب به فرمانداری منتقل میشه. ما 5 تا زن بودیم دیروز. 5 تا زن بودیم دیروز. و بستن جاده تونستیم انقلابی ایجاد کنیم که خبرمون به فرمانداری، به استانداری، به تمام بخش‌های کشوری، به وزارت، به همه جا برسه.
سلامتیشون.
بخش نیست جز زمانی که شما تمام برادران پشتوانه ما باشین.
Many marginalized women in Iran's major cities struggle to make a living and to provide for their families on a daily basis. In a context of high unemployment and poverty, these women turn to the most difficult jobs under the most insecure social and health conditions. Many of them become sex workers, deliver sexual services, and like any other worker, become alienated. They are then criminalized and brutally sentenced to death by the ruling regime, who itself caused their poverty and subordination in the first place.
فقط یه چی میدونم، رسم ما غیرت بودن، ایرانی بودن، شرف داشتن این نیست. این برای قایق سوراخ من بچه ها غرق شدیم، من غرق شدم، بچه ها من میشن، شما هم پسر من امسال زن و بچه هاتون غرق نشه، سال دیگه میشه، کی فرداش خبر داره؟ ما انگشته یه دستیم، من عاجز شدم مردم، من درمونده شدم، من بیکس شدم، من خانو زدیم شدم، من بدم میاد که تو دستیم بتونم بکنم.
In the meantime, if you are a second-class citizen from the point of view of the rulers, if you are an Afghan migrant, or if you are part of an ethnic group in the rural regions of Iran, you will be exploited and oppressed much more.
regions on the outskirts of Tehran, Afghan women and children are exploited and enslaved for a miserable wage by their masters and the capitalists of this patriarchal society and work under the most inhumane conditions without regular documents or employment contracts.
Trans people, especially trans women, are completely marginalized and deprived of social protection due to the existing discriminatory, gender bias, and trans-misogynist mentality in the society.
من میگم فیلمشونه، یعنی سیستم وقتی پسره دیگه چرا باید دختر باشه؟
خب فکر می‌کنم از شخصیتی دچار مشکل شدن از دوره نوجوانی
خانواده است چه ریاکشنی داشتن نسبت به
هیچ اصلا کنار نمیان به هیچ وجه.
همین الان هم کنار نمیان.
آره میگن تلقین میکنه ولی والا راستیتش هیچ تلقینی توش نیست. میگن نه برای چی تلقین میکنی به خودت که میخوای به زور به خودت بقبولونی که اصلا یه چیز دیگه هستی.
Many of them are unemployed and have no source of income. Many are not accepted by their families and by the institutions and are left homeless on the streets to live under very insecure conditions. They are often exposed to all forms of violence and exploitation and always fear of their lives.
من از اول آذر تا الان هیچ سختی ندارم برای زندگی کردن. هیچ جایی ندارم که اسکان پیدا کنم. همه ارگان‌های دولتی مراجعه کردم. بهزیستی، اورژانس 123 و کلانتری. ولی هیچ کدومشون مشکل منو حل نکردن. و گفتم به ما ربطی نداره. هیچ حمایتی از افراد ترنس نمیکنه. هیچ حمایت مادی نمیکنه. و هویت ترنس رو نادیده میگیره. اونایی که نمیخوان عمل کنن اینقدر تحت فشار همین حاکمیت قرار میگیرن که تن به جراحی میدن. ایران جهنمی برای ترنس است.
If you come to Tehran or visit major cities or smaller towns in Iran, you will see the children of the subordinated classes at the crossroads selling all sorts of goods. Child labor in this society, which represents one of the most brutal forms of capitalism and patriarchy, is increasing every day.
Afghan marginalized and migrant children are forced to work from a young age at much lower wages in far more precarious conditions than other workers to meet the economic needs of their families. In their workplace, they are often exposed to all kinds of social abuse and violence.
Dear comrade, in Iran, within the unequal and patriarchal division of labor, the domestic work, care and social reproduction, such as motherhood, marriage, sexual service, nursing and so on, have always been entrusted as a burden to women. These works, as well as our gender, are already assigned to us as a duty from birth, as if our destiny was engraved and we were doomed to this enslavement of our bodies. The penalty for disobeying our fate sometimes is getting decapitated with a sickle in sleep.
Outside homes, teachers and nurses in Iran have been protesting and striking for years against privatization of education, demanding equal pay, improved working conditions, and standard classrooms and facilities. But the ruling class never pays any attention to them and suppresses them.
من یک معلم هستم، به معلم بودنم افتخار میکنم، ولی تبعیض حق من نیست.
In fact, women, who are the main labor force in healthcare and education, have never been taken into account in the calculation of the domestic product in any country in the world, and are always the invisible workers of this patriarchal and capitalist system.
Hardworking nurses and teachers became visible in Iran only when Corona pandemic broke out and the mainstream space and media, fearing for the life and health of the ruling class, suddenly and falsely called us the frontline heroines of the coronavirus war.
Nurses and teachers, at a time when the ruling and the privileged class isolated themselves in their luxurious and safe homes, took on the responsibility of the whole society to guarantee health and public education services. They took public transport, attended crowded classrooms and hospitals full of corona patients, and unfortunately, many of them lost their lives and never returned home. Homes that in many cases were never safe in the first place.
Recently, our rulers decided to launch a population increase plan to generate more profit and surplus value. To execute this plan, once again, our bodies and the bodies of our children are supposed to be the tools of their shameful intentions.
To this end, the rulers have raised the issue of removing pregnancy screening tests from the public health service and interrupting the distribution of contraceptive medicines and services, including vasectomy, tubectomy, and sexual education to cities and villages across the country. They think of us as reproductive machines.
My sister, I want you to know what a filthy system we are fighting against and what kind of government Western states are negotiating and trading with in Iran. Please tell everyone that the rapists and the child abusers who are ruling in Iran have set the legal age of marriage for our innocent girls at 13. To normalize child abuse and encourage child marriage, the government recently introduced special bank loans for couples who marry girls under the age of 23.
We, marginalized and oppressed ethnic women, are deprived of the rights to education, social participation, and even self-care. This is due to our hard living conditions and the duties imposed on us in terms of reproductive labor in order to guarantee our own survival and that of our families.
In addition to the climate crisis and drought, the destruction and occupation of our habitat in favor of the neo-colonial and neoliberal policies and their development projects increasingly deprive us of the only resource that our livelihood depends on. The industrialization of rural areas and natural resources on one hand and land speculation on the other have had serious consequences on our subsistence and health. Our fertile lands are deserted, we have no clean water to drink, and it's increasingly harder to breathe in the polluted air.
Civil protection and empowerment projects in our regions introduced by the Central Powers are mere business agencies designed to circulate capital and commerce. These inhuman conditions force us as worthless masses to submit to exploitation by either accepting precarious jobs at the new industries or to immigrate from our homelands. Meanwhile, regime institutions assigned to facilitate investors and looters brutally suppress any local protest and organization. The mainstream media, as well as fake and commercialized activism, either deny and ignore our protests or hijack and de-radicalize our voice in favor of their own interests.
During all these years, we haven't been just victims, but we have always tried to resist and fight against this misogynistic order.
Currently, many of our brave sisters who fought in different fields for the rights of women, children, workers, migrants, ethnic groups, and the unprivileged have been arrested by the regime and are resisting in the prisons of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Many of them are unknown names and faces to the mainstream media and on the international level. They are voiceless women who spend every day of their precious lives inside crowded prison cells under the most inhuman conditions. They often fear that they may have been forgotten.
My dear sister, while the global political and pandemic phase is burdening women all across the world, In Iran, we are practically enslaved by multiple layers of gender, racial, and class discrimination and repression that are nurtured by patriarchy and capitalism, as well as an oppressive theocratic dictatorship.
We see no other way out than keeping up with the struggle, unite with each other, and stay in solidarity with our sisters across the borders. We therefore call upon you to share your privileges and to take the voice of our resistance to the distant regions across the world.
We join forces with you in this global struggle against patriarchy, gender oppression, and violence.
We hold hands with our sisters all around the world and raise up with all those who fight.